very much for joining us. Obviously, big thank you to Sian for coming to speak to everyone this evening. We really appreciate you putting the time in and giving up your evening, or a bit of it anyway. So I'll hand over to Sian, and like I say, we'll take some questions in the middle of the presentation and then at the end as well. So do put any questions as you think of them on the chat function, and then we can go through those as well. So Sian, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, welcome everybody. I hope you've all got a nice glass of gin or something by the side of you. That's one of the advantages of going to Zoom meetings, is you can drink what you like in the corner. If you've heard me before, you're not going to hear anything different, I don't think, because it's very much the same message as always, but I hope, you'll pick up something new. And also, as you're saying, ask questions, because I can talk about this for hours, and so if you ask questions, at least then you'll get it sort of focused on the areas that you're interested in. As Annie said, I'm a facilitator. I don't actually come up with a plan for the family. I help them come up with a plan. And that's really important, because, I'm the one who doesn't have to implement the plan. It's the family that has to do it. And, you can have as many experts and God knows how many people in there to help you out. But in the end, it's you that has to do it. You're the ones who have to do the work. And so it has to be your plan. As I say, people sometimes, and I do come across some families, who get so many people in all the time because they're not actually willing to do the work themselves, but or even make the decision themselves either. So and so they keep on sort of putting off the decision by getting out somebody else in, and that doesn't work too well either. So so I've been doing this for about 15, 16 years now, I should think, and been all over the country and got through lots of different situations, as you can imagine. And as the advert for this said, succession will happen. None of us get out of this alive. And so it's crazy not to be planning for this, because otherwise, if you don't, then circumstances may dictate how things pan out in the future if you haven't planned for it properly, and that could be a cause of huge expense or of family fallout as well. So it's really important that this discussion is had, this conversation on succession is had. People often ask me, when should we start talking about succession? Yesterday. And so that was the best time, but tomorrow then, okay? So, it's important to start having those conversations, because it takes a while. It takes a while to sort things out. And in fact, you should have that conversation on quite a regular basis as well, because things change, circumstances change, families change. And so maybe you need to alter things. And so you need to be sitting down and having that conversation. So, okay. I'll go through a few things then that needs to be discussed when you a young person comes back into the family business. Very important to have a discussion at this stage. And this is by, I come across a lot of young people who have now been in the family business for a number of years, for instance, and they say, I wish I hadn't come back, because we hadn't sorted things out properly. And we never talk about things, and I haven't got any responsibility and all this sort of stuff. So it's really important to have this conversation when that young person comes back into the family business. So there's clarity on what's expected of that young person and what that young person will expect from parents as well. So what are the things that need to be talked about? Well, you need to clarify the expectations of that young person and also the expectations of the rest of the family. And I always think you talk about the easy things first. So the first thing is time, really basic. What time do you expect this young person to start in the mornings? What time do you expect them to finish at night? Well, hope to finish at night. I was a dairy farmer. I understand it's hope, right? But, what time do you hope to finish at night? And incidentally, it's really important, because the younger generation coming in have a very different attitude to work than the previous generations. They want to work smarter, not harder. Whereas some previous generations would think if you didn't work 24/7, you were a hopeless farmer. And so that has to be addressed and talked about and understood. Okay. So what time they start in the morning, what time they hope to finish at night, do they work weekends or not? How many holidays do they have? And this is an opportunity for the older generation to also to think about, well, are they going to have more holidays now that they've got help in from the rest of the family? So it's a good talking point to start on. So that's time. The next one is housing then. Where is this young person going to live? Maybe they've been away to university, maybe they've been traveling, you know, they're in Australia or New Zealand or Canada or whatever. And they've now come back, and they may come back with a partner or a spouse. And so where are they going to live? Sort that out. You know, are they going to pay rent? You know, if they're coming back into the farmhouse, how is that going to work? But I would say if they come back with a partner or a spouse, it is better if they do not live within sight of mum and dad. Now, people have a good laugh about this and all that, but it is actually really important, because some of the most difficult and saddest conversations I've had are where, you know, the young person has come back with a spouse or a partner or whatever, and the family are falling out all the time. They're quarrelling about everything. I remember going to one family in Ireland where they were quarrelling about where they parked the cars on the yard. They were quarrelling about which bit of the garden they had, you know, and it's very important. And I've come across this so many times. You know, dad keeps knocking on the door, sometimes not even knocking on the door, but going into the young person's house and dragging them out at 8 o'clock. And I come on, we go and mend that water tank or something like that, you know. So it's very important that people have their own space. And although we can have a bit of a laugh about this, I have come across cases where there has been divorce because there has been too much of a clash, because they've been living too close together. You know, people say to me, well, you know, it's cheaper to have them on a barn conversion on the yard or whatever. Divorce can be very expensive. So, you know, think about it. Some people manage to work it very well, but others don't. And so think about it, and think about, you know, how, and if you have got a sort of barn conversion or the yard or whatever, make sure that people have their own space and their own privacy, and set down a few sort of ground rules as well, like, you know, okay, people don't work after a certain time at night, and unless there's an emergency, you know, the cows are up the road or something. So there are boundaries set. And also, you know, I mean, I remember, I know of someone where the daughter-in-law, son and daughter-in-law moved into the farmhouse. Mum and dad moved to a bungalow at the end of the lane. And dad kept coming down to the farm, which was fine. But the trouble is, he kept going into the farmhouse without being asked. And he was going into the farmhouse and making himself a cup of tea without knocking on the door. He was going in, and if he met a rep on the yard, he was bringing the rep into the house as well. And it wasn't his home anymore. It was the daughter-in-law's house. And so it created an awful lot of problems. So be careful about those sort of things, because it upsets people. And then it does not create a great working environment, particularly if you can't talk about it. So very important to sort all those things out right from the word go. Also, you know, if you've got a number of houses in the farm, and you've got different family members living in them, make sure that everything's fair. You know, that if the council tax is paid by the farm business for one house, it should be paid for by all the houses, you know, for all houses, and those sorts of things as well. And, you know, how is maintenance going to be done? How's that going to be paid for? If there's renovation done, does the farm business pay for it, or do individuals pay for it? Those sort of things need to be sorted out as well, because they can be a huge source of problems. So that's housing. The next one then is money. This young person comes back into the business. How are you going to pay them? You may decide that they come into the partnership straight away, or you may decide, well, actually, you know, we'll leave it for a couple of years to see how we get on. And so, but there still has to be working out what you pay this person. And I do say, you know, you have to be very careful about this, because it deals with people's self-worth. And so I always say that it's very important that you acknowledge that that young person, how much they are worth in the marketplace. You may not be able to pay them that in that business, but it's important that they are acknowledged for how much they're worth, how much they would be paid if they were working for somebody else, because it's good for their self-esteem. It's also good for their siblings, if they have any, because they may have siblings who are working off farm and saying, well, you know, it's all right for him, him or her, you know, they're working on the farm and all this, and they're fine. And they don't realise that that young person may be taking a cut in wages to actually work in that family business. And that often happens. And so it's important that there's clarity there. So acknowledging for how much they're worth is important. If you can't pay them that, that's fine. But as I say, acknowledge that. And what I say is you maybe need to be sitting and talking about this as well. I'll pluck figures out of the air now. I always sort of say this is that if this person is worth 25,000 a year, probably more than that, but anyway, say if they're worth 25,000 a year, and you say, right, okay, we can't pay you that, we can pay you 15. Okay, that's fine. It's acknowledged and all that. There's a £10,000 shortfall there. And what I would say then is you look at what that young person gets as perks in that business that they wouldn't get if they worked for somebody else. And it may be accommodation. It may be the diesel tank on the yard. It may be the use of a truck. It may be the use of the phone, all those sort of things. And I put a figure on it. Because again, if siblings here, you know, oh, well, it's all right for him or her, they've never had to pay for their own diesel or whatever like that. So clarify that, put a figure on it, and say in this instance it comes to £5,000 a year. Well, that's already increased that 15,000 wage up to 20,000 because they've got £5,000 worth of perks. There's still a £5,000 shortfall there, and I would suggest you keep a record of it. Maybe not officially, because there may be some tax issues, but keep a record of it, because if in the future somebody challenges that business and says, right, okay, you know, I want a share of this business, you need to have a figure there that says this business owes that young person this amount of money because they were underpaid over the years. Because what I found is I've gone into businesses where this has happened, where, you know, brothers and sisters or whatever come in and say, we want to share now. And the person who's worked there is saying, well, hang on a minute, I've never been paid properly. So, you know, that should be acknowledged as far as sharing is concerned. Well, it's very difficult to work it out then. So if you keep a record of it and say, right, okay, you know, this person was underpaid by £5,000 this year. Next year, it might be £7,000, you know, so it keeps a record of it. That's the minimum you should do. You may even decide to use that figure as to say, well, okay, let's allow this person to buy their way into the business with that £5,000 shortfall. So for instance, they could buy animals, they could buy land. If it's a company structure, they could buy shares in the company. Those sorts of things, you know, could be considered as well, because in a way they're doing it, but you can actually officially do that by doing that. So, you know, obviously, whatever you do, you know, before you do anything really, you must talk to a tax expert, because tax is very complicated, and I've come across people who've had very unnecessary tax bills because they did just things in the wrong order. So it's very important when you're doing things like this to talk to your accountant or a tax expert to make sure you get it right first. Okay, so it's really important. But you know, and accountants are doing this all the time, and they will help you with this. So that's the money side of things, you know. As I say, this is the young person coming back into the business, but after a few years, you need to be thinking about drawing a line in the sand. And what I mean by this is a young person may be coming back into the business. They may have been there now for a number of years, and that business is improving or expanding down to that young person's efforts. And if you haven't been able to pay out other children, then that young person's efforts should not be shared with other children. Because if, you know, if the business has expanded because of that young person's efforts, it's not fair that that is then shared with their siblings, because the siblings may not have contributed towards it, you know. And this is a thing that I've come across again, is where, you know, I've gone into businesses where the brother or the daughter, you know, the son or the daughter who's running the farm now says, well, I'm not going to expand this business because the bigger I expand it, the more I have to share with my sister, or my brother. So it's much more important to say, right, okay, from now on, it's quite difficult to do, but from now on, we draw a line in the sand. And the expansion or the success of this business should be down to that young person's efforts and should not be deemed as something that should be shared with siblings, okay? What you can do as well is, what I say to young people, I talk to young farmers quite a lot, and what I say to them is, if you can, pay out the brothers and sisters early. You know, it's quite important if you can do that. And I have gone into businesses where they are able to do that. You know, they've been, and it's important for the person who's farming, the young person who's come back on the farm, because they haven't got this thing hanging over them that one day they're going to have to pay out brothers and sisters. They don't know exactly how much it's going to be, and they don't know when it's going to happen. And so that's, you know, a burden for a lot of people. So if they can pay out their brothers and sisters at an early stage, that's great, because then they're independent and they can go, you know, and they can do whatever they like. And it's also better for the brothers and sisters, because usually that is when they need the money. You know, they're in their 20s or whatever, and that's when they need the money. You know, they're trying to buy a house. So, you know, I've gone into families where families have put deposits or helped the rest of the family buy houses or help them set up other businesses. So that's the time to do it, if you can do it then. You know, sometimes you can't, but if you can do it then, that is a really good thing to do, really good. And, you know, I've even gone into families where, you know, the young person has taken out, well, the business has taken out a loan to pay brothers and sisters out at that stage. And so that young person who's farming then, you know, can get on with their own business without having this thing hanging over them that they have to pay out brothers and sisters. And I do say to parents as well, be very careful. You don't have to be equitable to be fair. Now, we all want to be fair to our children, you know, we all want to do that. But you don't, you know, just because a farm is worth 2 million doesn't mean to say you have to give 2 million to all the other children as well. That farm is only worth 2 million if you sell it. What you're giving that child is actually an opportunity to farm and maybe to keep it in the family, you know. And so the other children don't have to have that, and often they don't expect it, you know. To be honest, I encourage all siblings to be in the business, in the meeting when I take a facilitator meeting. So that's what I call the off-farm children as well. They're there too, because they need to understand what's going on, because, you know, obviously they want to, you know, they have some sort of claim on that business, and they're part of the family, you know, and so they need to understand what's happening. And if they're not there, that's when they start kicking up a fuss, because they don't understand what's happening and they feel that something's being done behind their backs. And that's when they start kicking up a fuss. So it's very important that they're there to understand. And I have never, ever had a young person who's what I call the off-farm child force the sale of a farm just so they can have an equal share. What they're brought to realize is, if they did have an equal share, the farm would have to be sold. And I've never had anybody do that, because they say, well, I'd like to see the farms remain in the family. You know, it's important for the family and mum and dad, because they've built this up, you know, it's important, and it's important to them for that farm to remain in the family. So that conversation is very important to have. What they are concerned about, the off-farm children, is, what if my brother or sister gets the farm, and then when mum and dad, after mum and dad's days, they flog the farm off, you know, and get 2 million, and they go and live in Barbados or something. Now, the poor soul who's farming probably doesn't have that intention at all, but it is a concern sometimes for the off-farm children. And so what you can do is you can put a clause in that says, okay, if this young person sells the farm within the next number of years, you can say whatever years you like, you know, say 10 years, for instance. If this young person sells the farm in the next 10 years, they have to pay a share of it to their brothers and sisters. And it's on a sliding scale, you know, if they sell it in the first year, they have to pay more to brothers and sisters than if they sell it in 10 years' time. And that clause is there then, so that it sort of makes the off-farm children secure and feel happy that, you know, they're not being cheated out of something. You have to be careful with that clause, though, because if that young person wants to sell the farm to buy a bigger farm, that should not be invoked then, because it's growing the business, you know. So, but it can be done. It can be done, okay? And that just calms everybody down, you know, that you know, they're not going to be cheated out of something. So that's the money, I think, all of that, yeah. The next area then is communication. Now, it's extraordinary, but I think this is the one thing that everybody, and nearly everybody I have a meeting with, said this is the best thing that came out of that meeting. And that is setting up proper business meetings. You are running businesses, and it's not good enough to be shouting at each other across the yard or say, oh, I'll have a cup of tea, you know, we have a cup of tea and have a bit of a chat now and again. You need to be having proper business meetings, setting aside, you know, half an hour, once a week, once a fortnight or whatever, sitting down as business partners and behaving as business partners, not as parents and children, but behaving as business partners and having proper business meetings, discussing, you know, what we're going to be doing in the next week or so, you know, what we need to be prepared for, what we've done in the last 2 weeks, what went well, what didn't go so well, what lessons we've learned, you know, how are the finances looking, all this sort of thing, and delegating work. And even part of that meeting may be bringing in your staff if you are farm staff as well, because there's nothing worse for farm staff than having a mixed message from a family farm. You know, dad tells them to go and do something, and 10 minutes later daughter comes along and says, oh no, don't do that, you want you to do that, you know, drives farm staff up the wall. So maybe having a meeting for the family first and then the staff afterwards to tell them what's going on would be helpful. And, you know, as I say, families say this is one of the best things they ever do, because if I put up against a wall and said, right, what's the biggest problem I come across in families and family farms? It's lack of proper communication. You know, you're not talking to each other properly. And it's because of strain and stresses of the day, you know, and the business. So if you put aside time every week or every fortnight to have a proper business meeting, make sure somebody's in charge of making sure that meeting happens, you know, so that, you know, if normally you have it on a Tuesday and, oh God, it's dry and we're mowing silage or whatever, and you can't have the meeting, well, make sure that there's somebody is responsible for making sure that that meeting is rescheduled properly. And it makes a huge difference. So people understand what's going on. And also it's a way of actually training the younger generation into the business, because they're understanding how decisions are being made and they're being helped with responsibility. So communication, very important. And what I've come in with some families, and, you know, some businesses are going to very good businesses, you know, and they're big businesses. And what they've decided, they have their, what they call their operational meetings every week. And then every quarter, they have what's called a strategic meeting. So the operational meetings are, you know, which field the cows are going into this week, or we got a TB test, and, or, you know, we got a shearing next week or whatever, that sort of thing. But then the strategic meetings are looking at the bigger picture. You know, what are we doing as a whole as a business? Do we need to be looking at extra land? What about, you know, are we in the right, have we got the right mix of enterprises at the moment? Are we missing opportunities? Are there opportunities out there we should be looking at? So a big picture stuff. And then also these businesses also have an annual general meeting where they sit down and they review the whole year, have a budget for the following year. They even may have their bank manager or accountant in that meeting, so that, you know, or a consultant or something. So they have an annual meeting about, you know, where are we going and all that. So it's absolute clarity and good communication. I mean, this is what other businesses do when you're running big businesses now. And so it's important to be able to have that clear communication, and so that everybody in the business feels they are part of it. Because the next bit I'm moving on to is responsibility. Young people want responsibility. Most of them. Okay, I've come across one or two, very few, who've said, oh, you know, I don't want responsibility. I just want to turn up and earn my money and go and drink on the beer at the weekend, and that's it, really. But most young people want responsibility. And I think we're doing a huge disservice to the industry if we are not giving them responsibility. There are huge challenges ahead for farming. There always has been, but they're even, you know, they're coming even thick and faster at the moment. And if we are not giving the young people the opportunity and the, you know, the responsibility for helping with this business, then we are doing a disservice to the industry. And so they need responsibility. And so even when they first come back to the business, if you can give them some sort of responsibility for some sort of part of the enterprises, that is important. You know, for instance, if you've got a dairy farm, you could say to a young person, right, okay, you are responsible for the young stock. I will give you a calf at 24 hours old. It will have had colostrum. It will be tagged. The passport will be done and all that. You have that animal, right? And I want that back in the herd calving at 2 years old. Right, okay, you've got to give them a budget so they don't spend too much, you know. And also you want to have checks in there, like, okay, we're going to weigh that animal every sort of 6 weeks or whatever to make sure she's on target. But otherwise you let them do it, you know, and it's real responsibility, not, oh yes, this is the way you do it. Because that's how people learn. People learn through getting responsibility. They don't learn by being told what to do all the time. And so it's really important that you're giving them responsibility. And the ideal situation is, you know, that when the young person comes back into the business, mum and dad's responsibilities up here somewhere, and their responsibilities are down there. But over time, mum and dad's responsibilities should diminish and the young person's increase. And at some point, they cross over. And at that crossover point, the overall responsibility for the business passes from one generation to the next. And you plan it as such, you know, and the length of time is dependent on the ages of everybody and the experiences of everybody. But you agree on it, and you don't change the damn date when it gets closer either, you know. So you're planning for it. So the older generation are gradually stepping back and the younger generation are gradually stepping up to the plate. So everybody understands that. And that's where people make a big mistake. They don't do that. And you know, and I think it's very hard for the older generation to step back. You know, I'm of the older generation now, and it is hard, but it's something that you need to be planning for, because, you know, otherwise it's a detriment to the business, because I've gone into businesses where they are stagnating because they are not giving responsibility to the younger generation. Okay, so that's a bit about the younger people. I'm going to stop now and we'll have a look at the questions and any comments that anybody's making. So there's a few questions in there. Are you going to sort them out, Emily, or have I got to look them up? Let's have a look here.
No, let's have a look. So we've got Mike commented that the perks are often tax-free as well, when we were talking about the money side and like you were totting everything up. Sarah said, where do you stand if the farm is rented with off-farm siblings payout?
This is why it's important for the off-farm siblings to be in the meeting, because they have to understand the reality of the situation, you know. And if mum and dad need an awful lot of money to get out of that farm, this is where the problems are with rented farms is, you know, they haven't got an asset to sell, and yet they may need to get off that farm to buy a house to live in. And, you know, if they haven't saved up more, they haven't got another house, then that's very difficult. So that's why it's important to have those siblings there to realise the reality of the situation. And, you know, if they don't want to farm, you know, then why should they have a share in anything like that, you know? And this is why I think it's quite important how you bring up your children. You bring them up with realistic expectations. You know, you bring them up saying to them, look, if any of you want to farm in the future, this is a rented farm. You may get an opportunity to that, but there ain't going to be a lot of cash for the rest of you, you know? And it may be that the off-farm siblings, if mum and dad go and buy a house, well, the off-farm siblings will get that house at the end of their days, and that's their inheritance, and that's it. You know, you have to be realistic about it. And sadly, you know, I go into some families and they ain't very realistic at all. You know, I swear to God, they think I've got a magic wand. Well, unfortunately, I haven't got one. So, you know, this is why it's important for them to be there. And I've gone into meetings, honestly, where, you know, sometimes the family will come out with the books, you know, and they look at the profit and loss account. And it's a bloody big shock for some people. You know, they've got this, even children who've been brought up in farms, you know, they're now working somewhere else. And they don't realise how little income some farms are throwing off. And so, you know, it's that dose of reality that's really important there. Shouldn't the pension from the farm or assets for the parents' retirement be the priority in how siblings paid out? Yeah. Inheritance should be right to managing expectations. Yeah, this is the thing. You know, we've got to be careful. I've got sympathy with both sides. First of all, succession would not happen if the older generation had not worked damn hard to get that place in the first place. So you've got to respect that and realise there would be no farm and there would be no succession if it wasn't for the hard work of the older generation. Okay, the older generation should be grateful that there's another generation coming in that want to run the farm, you know. And so there's got to be a good sort of respect and give and take between the two generations. Yes, there must be a priority for pensions. Now, you know, hopefully people have been putting away pensions as they've been working, but some people don't. And some people say the farm is my pension. And what that often means is the person who's going to run the farm has to pay the pension to the next generation. And that's okay if that's what you want to do. And what I do say to young people then is, right, okay, you've got to put mum and dad's pension, work out how much it is, and then that's in your budget. Now, that again needs to be talked about with off-farm siblings, because off-farm siblings really need to understand that the person who's running the farm is paying mum and dad's pension, and they are not. And so that again is, a thing that needs to be realized. And yes, pension is far more important. But what I do find is, and there is a danger that parents actually sell themselves short sometimes to be fair, and that's not right. You should actually make sure that mum and dad are safe. And I'll talk a little bit about, retirement and everything now in my next bit. What if siblings do want to farm, but parents believe there's only room for one to become a farmer? That's a hell of a difficult conversation to have. And what I, this is another thing is, I would definitely say be careful about putting siblings into a business together. The most difficult meetings I have had is where brother and sister, or brothers or sisters, have been almost forced to be put in a business together, and they don't like it, and they fall out, and there's big trouble. And mum and dad are saying, well, we want you to work together. It's economies of scale and all that. And yeah, that sounds great, but if they can't do that, then you're actually putting a millstone on their neck, and you're making them all unhappy. And so it's important to be realistic about this. So if there are more than one wanting to farm, you need to think of this at a very early stage. I came across a family in mid Wales a few years ago now, and they thought about this when their youngest child was born. They had 3 sons, and when their youngest son was born, they thought about it then. So that their whole business, every business decision that they made was to grow that business, so that if the 3 wanted to farm, they would be able to give them an opportunity to the 3. And so that's why succession is so important, that you think about it in an early stage. You need to grow your business to the size of your family, which is a hell of a form of birth control if you think about it. But, you need to be thinking about that, because otherwise, it's a very difficult decision to be had. And what I've come across with a number of families now, and that sort of thing happens, is that, right, okay, we all sit down together and we say, right, for instance, I know a family where there are 3 sons, again, another family where there are 3 sons. And what they've decided to do is they will all work together for 10 years to be able to have enough farms for all of them. And they're actually on track, this family that are doing it. They're going to do it before 10 years. And so they're actually working together to grow the business. And some of it is diversification and all that, to be able to grow the pot, to be able to share it out between people. But if you can't do that, and there is only one room to become a farmer, then you have to sit down and talk about it and say, right, okay, what can we do to help the others? And, is it getting them into tenancies or share farming agreements, and really, really giving everybody a helping hand? It's difficult. I mean, there are no easy answers to this. It is really difficult. As part of succession, would you agree that investment in training is too low on farms? Definitely. I think, business management, I go into farms and the young person is sitting there, they've been there in the business for 10 years and they've never seen the accounts. Well, God, how the hell can you be running or be expected to run a business in the future if you don't even understand the accounts? Never been to visit the accountant, and these are the things that have to be done. It's not enough to be able to know how to shear a sheep or milk a cow. It has to be managing a business, and it has to be training. And people management is the biggest one, because a lot of farmers don't get on too well with people. And yet if they want to milk their cows or shear their sheep and do all the work themselves, that's fine. But if they want to grow that business and they have to deal with other people, then they need to be able to manage people as well. So it's essential to be training, and there's loads of training out there. AHDB, all sorts of people are out there offering training for people. So, it's important to be able to think that. And this is why when the young person comes in, you assess their skills when they come back into the business. Have they got the skills to be able to run this business? And if not, right, okay, what are we going to do about it? And, some of that will be training from mum and dad, but some will be, sort of official training, or maybe even going and working for somebody else for a time to be able to do that. Part if somebody want to have parents believe there's on their part of the sound you already said there's not enough, and sometimes there's often has to be pension as there is. Sian, you have already said there is not a lot of income sometimes on farms. So often the farm has to be the pension, as there is an extra cash. Yeah, that is true. And so you have to be realistic about that, because if the farm cannot support 2 families, you have to realise it right from the word go. Because you cannot say, well, you cannot expect a young person to come back and then be slogging their hearts out and they're not going to be making a reasonable living. These things have to be faced. And if the farm isn't big enough, then maybe, you know, somebody has to be a part-time farmer, or you may have to sell the farm, you know, God forbid, but you may have to, but you have to be realistic about it, and you have to face these things head on, rather than sort of muddling on and people being upset. And, you know, this is where mental health problems come in, because, you know, there's one business and it's not able to support 2 families. And you may get a young person that's come back and feel that they can't get married, can't have children, because they can't, you know, the business isn't big enough to support them. And that's tragic, you know. So you've got to be realistic about these things. Talk about pension, few tax benefits. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you've got to. Pensions, you know, for goodness sake, get advice on them, you know, NFU, FUW, if you're in Wales, accountant, look at pensions, you know, and it may be, you know, you might not want to actually have a pension. It might be that you decide your pension is to buy a couple of houses in the village or something like that, you know, that may be something. Or if you're a tenant farmer, you're, you know, buying when you, instead of sort of buying a new tractor every 3 years or whatever, you put a deposit on a house in a village nearby, rent it out to somebody else for a number of years, and then when you retire, you've got something to retire to. You know, there's more ways of having a pension than just putting it into a company. Have experience with unforeseen care fees. Oh yeah, care fees. Yeah, we'll have a talk about them in a minute. They are a nightmare, absolute nightmare, and this is why you need to be thinking about handing on the assets. Okay. Love dairy run by a second. Yeah, right. Okay, that's good. Have you any advice on planning to avoid care home fees? Yeah, right. Okay, we'll go into that. So I think I hope I've sort of covered those. I'll just
Great, thanks, Sian.
Perfect. You know, keep on coming with them. The next bit then is the older generation. You know, you've had the young person there now, they've been there for a number of years now, and it's time for mum and dad to step back. First of all, you've got to respect them. It's a very difficult thing to do for mum and dad to step back from that business. For some, hell, I mean, I met some who can't wait to get out the gate, you know, but for most of them, they find it very difficult to stand back and to pass on responsibility and all that. So that has to be dealt with, and it has to be done sympathetically, but it has to be done. It has to be done. And so talking about, right, what does retirement mean to that farmer? And, you know, that farming couple, because it means so many different things to different people. You know, as I said, some people can't wait to get out of the gate, and the others say, well, the only way you're getting me out of here is in a box, you know, and all points in between. So you need to understand that and sort of prepare for that. And I hope that the younger people are going to start thinking about what retirement means to them much earlier, so that they plan for it, so they don't lose their hobbies, they don't lose their interests. So they have a plan, right, okay, by the time I'm 60 or whatever, I'm going to be moved off the farm, I'm going to be doing this, that and the other, you know, and they may be running other businesses because, you know, okay, they may be physically not able to farm anymore, but they've still got the abilities and maybe the drive to be able to do something else. And so that's what we need to be thinking about. But respect, you know, understanding what the next generation and how awkward and how you know, how unhappy they sometimes feel about this, and, you know, and helping them. And it's crazy, you know, you get some farmers say, oh, I don't want to retire and I don't want to do this and all, and then they do step back, and it's very frustrating then for the next generation to hear, you know, in 2 years' time, we should have done this years ago. And you think, oh my God, you know, why didn't they do it years ago? And so it's important to have those conversations. Money and housing at this stage is very important. Now, this is where we're talking about the pensions. We need to sit down with the older generation and understand how much their pension is going to be. You know, so you can look it up online, you can find out how much your pensions are going to be. You talk to your providers if you had a pension plan. You talk, you know, you look at the government as well, the state pension, which isn't going to be too exciting, but, you know, it's there. And you work out if it's going to be enough for the older generation to live on. And I don't mean, you know, sort of living on the breadline. They've worked hard all their lives and they need to have a comfortable retirement. Okay, that doesn't mean living, it may not mean living in Barbados or something like that, but, you know, making sure that they have a comfortable retirement. So putting a figure on it, understanding what they're getting from their pensions. And if they're not getting enough, then agreeing that the farm or whoever pays that top up. And it's usually the farm pays a top up if it's not enough. And so, but you have to put a figure on it, because it's unfair on the person who's running that farm business to almost have an open checkbook for mum and dad, because that can be a disaster and it causes a lot of problems. So putting a figure on it, saying, right, okay, this is how much mum and dad need every year from the farm as their pension. And you can index link it with inflation if you like. You know, that's what you do. So that goes into the budget. So the young person running the business now has, right, okay, in my budget is such and such an amount, and I pay that every year to mum and dad. That's the first thing in my budget. And then mum and dad know exactly what they're getting as well. Okay, so that's important. Housing as well. Where are mum and dad going to live? And that is important. You know, I've gone into, and I think this needs to be, again, older, you know, people, middle-aged people need to be taking responsibility and saying, right, okay, I'm going to be moving out of the farmhouse on such and such a date, because you need the person who's farming to be in the farmhouse, you know, calving cows, lambing ewes, whatever. And you need the older generation to be living in a house that's suitable for them. I've come across houses where, you know, granny and granddad are still living in the farmhouse. You know, they're in their 80s and they've got 6 bedrooms and they're living in 2 rooms, you know. And of course, if they're in their 80s, you ain't going to get them out now. That's unfair. And so it's very important that people plan for when they're going to move out of the farmhouse. And so, because there are tax issues there as well, or can be. So be very careful about it. So moving out of the farmhouse, and, you know, and it's important at this stage as well to talk to mum. Because usually there is a woman in that business who's put that farm first for the last 40 years. And it's important to sit down and talk to mum and ask her what she wants, because she has put the farm first. And so, you know, and often mums will say, well, I'd like a nice little bungalow that's easy to clean and it's in the village so I can catch the bus and I don't have to, you know, and I'm not miles away from anywhere. So those sort of conversations need to be had, you know, and if those things can't be fulfilled, then it's important to do that and to be able to do that. Now, so that's the pension side, the housing, sort all that out. Yes, care homes. Now, this is the big one. Now, when you do succession, you need to think of it in two areas. One is the actual business, the other is the actual assets. Now, you don't have to pass on the two at the same time. You can pass on the business to the next generation at one time and pass on the assets at another time, if that's what you wish. But you must be very careful that you do not want older people to still be owning farms if they need to go into care, because that farm will then have to pay for the care. And I have come across a farm in my area a few years ago. It was a small dairy farm, 150 dairy cows. Dad had died. Mum was the owner of the farm, farming in partnership with her son. She had to go into care. And so they were farming in partnership, but she still owned the land. She had to go into care and she was in care for a long time. And in the end, that farm had to be sold because it was paying for the care, the nursing care. So be very careful about having a plan of when that asset should be passed on to the next generation. And be careful, because some councils actually backdate it. So say if you've passed your, you know, your asset on in the last 2 years, they can still claim on it. So be careful about the check in your area and, you know, and start passing that asset on. Again, talk to your accountant, talk to a tax advisor about this. When's the best time to do this? Because yeah, you can't avoid the care home fees if the asset, you know, the person owning the asset is owning, you know, is in the care home and they own a farm. That's still at the moment, you know, that is still an issue. There have been moves and talks about it for a number of years now, but nothing has come of it. You know, they've talked about putting sort of limits on it and all that sort of stuff, but nothing has come of it. And, you know, now I don't think politicians are going to be talking about it for a long time. But you never know. But, you know, and because it is an issue for other businesses as well, you know, as you can imagine. But passing on that asset, be careful about it, be very careful about it. Make sure that that asset is passed on to the next generation in a timely manner. Yeah, and then the older generation, their self-esteem must be managed, because in a way they feel that they're losing status once they are not the decision maker in that business. And they do lose status to a certain extent. You know, for me in Wales now, you know, the farmer walking around the Royal Welsh Show, and he's got, you know, he's walking around the machinery aisles, and the salesmen are trying to call him in with a glass of whiskey and trying to, you know, sell him something. If he hasn't got the checkbook anymore, all of a sudden he's not talked to anymore. It's the son or the daughter who's running the business who is now, you know, doing that. And that's a loss of status in some ways to some people. And so you have to manage that, and you have to be careful about that. And I think, again, middle-aged people need to be aware of that, you know, and need to be planning for that as well. So, yeah, but it has, you know, you have to be careful about that. And also to do things, you know, what is dad going to do? Because, you know, you're sitting there, I'm often sitting there, right, okay, mum and dad are going to step back now. And they'll say, well, what the hell are we going to do with dad? And mum is saying, well, he ain't going to be under my feet all day. And so, you know, you need to understand what mum and dad are going to do. And, you know, I've sat and had very difficult conversations with family members saying, well, God, what are you going to do? And no, I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested. All I wanted to do was farm. And so I do say to young farmers, for God's sake, do not lose your hobbies and interests. And because the easiest ones have been where farmers have had really, you know, keen interest in other things, and they've gone off and done other things, you know, and because it's a third stage of life, and we are living longer, healthier, fitter lives. And so there are opportunities to do other things, you know. I swear one day, I've said this several times, one day I'm going to hire a plane and I'm going to stick a load of farmers on it and take them to India or somewhere like that, some underprivileged area, and take them there for a month and see the skills that they have that are so transferable and helpful to other people, you know, because people don't realize, and farmers very much underestimate themselves, they have a wide range of skills that are easily transferable to other businesses. I've come across farmers who have retired to another business, and they're saying, hell, this is easy, you know, it's a sort of a doddle compared with farming. And so maybe that in the future is what people ought to be doing, is thinking, right, okay, in the future, I'm going to be retiring to another business. And I have come across families who've done that, you know. I remember one family, they decided to set up a cheese making business. Okay, it was linked to the farm, but that's what they wanted to do. There was another family, the wife was running a business, I can't remember what it was some sort of shop thing, but I can't remember. Anyway, and the husband had helped her set it up. And now they were going to retire off the farm and go and run that business. And their son was only 24. He was taking over the farm, you know. So it's you know, it was very exciting for them. So those are the things that can be done. And I think maybe, you know, we start having this conversation at an earlier stage and say, what are we going to retire to? Rather than, you know, oh God, I don't want to retire, and what am I going to do? What are we going to retire to? Is a much more positive sort of conversation to have. Just quickly then to finish up, I'll come and have a look at the questions in a minute. There's so many things I haven't talked about, but wills, important. In fact, I've come across every excuse under the sun not to have a will, and none of them are valid. Everybody should have a will, right? Okay. Be careful about executors. You know, obviously have somebody who's younger than you would be a good idea. And also ask people if they would be willing to be executors. Lots of things about wills that I can't really talk about. Yes, you must have wills. And, you know, people say, oh, well, I make a will when things settle down. Things never settle down, right? Okay, so make a will for today. And when things change, you just change your will. It's quite simple. I've done it myself. So, you know, it's quite simple. The other thing to remember is power of attorney, lasting power of attorney. Very important if you've got people who are sole signatories on businesses or things like that. And I would suggest it's not just old age. Young people have strokes. I did one, that family who the father and mother went off to run a business, and their 24-year-old son was running the business, the farm. They did power of attorney for him because he was going to be running that business as a sole trader, and he raced motorbikes. And they thought, oh my God, if he has an accident, and that's the thing, the whole business shuts down. bank accounts are frozen, no bills are paid, the whole works. So you need power of attorney for certain people. So be very careful about it. Go and do it with your solicitor. There's two sorts of power of attorney. One is for the business, one is for health. So it's up to you whether you do the health one, but the business one should really be thought about if, you know, your sole signatories in businesses, because I've come across businesses, oh my God, they've had terrible problems and it's very expensive to sort out, really expensive now. And so, you know, power of attorney needs to be thought about. I'll go back to questions now because I think we're supposed to be finishing in 5 minutes, so we'll give it a go. Care fees, rare fees, half farm hobbies, yeah. And you have experience farm giving people opportunity. Yeah, share farming, yes. I've actually seen some families use the share farming structure to bring the next generation in. You know, they wanted to do it that way. So that's an opportunity. But yeah, share farming, definitely. Because some people want to hang on to the farm because they say, well, grandchildren may want to farm. The next generation, they want to farm, but my grandchildren may. And, you know, once you've sold a farm, farm's gone, like, isn't it? You know? And so it's a great opportunity to be able to give an opportunity to a young person. There are a lot of young people out there who are fantastic. They may be young people who, you know, like we had previously, the farm is too small for more than, you know, one of them. And so they may be a farming child who hasn't got an opportunity at home. Or it may be somebody completely outside agriculture who has not got a farm, you know, to go to at all. And so giving them an opportunity to farm is a fantastic idea. They're a great, there's a lot of help out there. AHDB have got work on it, and there's individuals out there who help you to set these things up. But they are brilliant. I think it's a great idea because we've got, you know, we've got new ideas coming into farming. Then if you've got somebody who's from outside farming coming in and you give them an opportunity, you know, you've got new ideas coming in. And also I've spoken to the older generation who have done this. I have several people who've done this and they love it because it's an advantage for the farm owner, because they are still classed as a farmer. So they're still taxed as a farmer. And it's also a huge advantage to the young person then to be given an opportunity to farm. And as I say, I've spoken to the older farmers who've done that, and they said it's given them a new lease of life, and it's been so good to be able to give an opportunity to a young person and see the enthusiasm. And also it's good as well, because say you do this joint venture for 15 years or whatever, at the end of that 15 years, that farm is still a viable farm. It's still got the good infrastructure there. Whereas if you've rented it out for summer grazing and things like that, you know, the farm isn't going to be in that good a state. Whereas the farm has been continually kept up to date with buildings and infrastructure and all that as well. So it's ready to go then if you have a grandchild who wants to take it on. So yeah, fantastic opportunity to do that and a great option. Yeah, good idea. Okay, do you want me to finish now at 9 or
has anyone got any other questions? Oh, Sharon's just asked, have you advice about helping wives, partners of children to feel included?
Yeah, wives, partners, yeah, very important. If you be very good to your in-laws, you know, your sons-in-law and your daughters-in-law. If you don't want them in the business, that's up to you. But for God's sake, welcome them into the family. Because what I've done, I've gone into some families, and it's not always, but it's often the son's wife and the daughter-in-law who is treated like a pariah because they're afraid she's going to run off with the farm. Well, hell's bells, you know, if you treat her like that, there's more likely she will. So for goodness sake, if you don't want a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law as part of the business, that's up to you. But make sure you welcome them into the family and you make them feel involved and all that, because as I say, I've come across, and particularly some daughters-in-law who've been treated very badly. You know, they're held at arm's length, and you think, well, that's not great for family relationships. So make sure there's a separation. And, you know, talking about communication and family meetings and all that sort of stuff, in a lot of families, they also not only organise business meetings, but they organise family get-togethers as well, so that the in-laws, sons-in-law, daughters-in-law, they they have a little bit of an understanding of the business. You might not tell them the finances of it, but you just tell them what's happening on the farm, and you help them to feel part of the family, and that's really important, because the thing you want to avoid is family breakup. And, you know, I see so much of it, and a lot of it is preventable by just actually sitting down and communicating with people and making people feel involved. But yeah, and particularly the partner or the spouse or the person who's farming. You must never alienate them, because, you know, that's what, you know, this is where the divorces come in. I mean, we can't talk about divorce for hours. This is, you know, you're almost making it a self-fulfilling prophecy if you don't welcome that daughter-in-law or son-in-law into the business. Okay.
Brilliant. Has anyone else got any questions that they want to ask? I know there's so much to take in, and that was just absolutely brilliant. So I'm hoping that there are some, and I know that Sian, you could talk about this for days and days and days. So it might be worth us thinking about having a follow-up to this later on in the year or something. But if anyone's got any questions for now, we please do send them via the chat. Or Sian, if you've got any other points that you want to go through quickly.
Well, I suppose there are two things to remember that, you know, I do see a lot of. First of all, psychologists tell us there's such a thing as father-son rivalry. It's not father-daughter or mother-daughter, but father-son rivalry. And I have seen this, and you may need to be very careful about that. Where, you know, fathers and sons, some fathers and sons, yeah, they get on fine. Others, yeah, you know, they have a bit of an argument now and then, but they're okay. But on the other end of the scale, they really don't get on at all. And so you need to be prepared for this. And this is why you need to have proper business meetings with other people there and all that sort of stuff. And the other thing is sibling rivalry. This is why I'm saying be careful about putting children into a business together. Because these are one of the biggest problems, is that people say, right, okay, I want my sons or daughters to be in the business together, and they don't want to be there, you know. And often I hear people in their 50s saying, it spoiled my life. I didn't want to be in this business. Or one will say, I did all the work and he did nothing, and yet he still gets paid the same as me, that type of thing. So be very careful about that. And so what I say to people, if you've got two sons or daughters or whatever who want to farm, plan right from the word go how that farm would split, so that you know so it's already decided before you do anything. And if they want to work together, then that's fine. But if then they find in the future they can't, there's already a plan there of how that farm will split. And, you know, and you're working towards that. Because I came across one family some years ago now where they did have to split a farm because two brothers fallen out. They were now in their 50s, and it was terrible. They could hardly sit in a room together. It was really bad. And they had to split the farm. And unfortunately, because they hadn't planned for this, they had two farms. Well, they bought the next door farm. So one brother lived on the original farm, the other brother lived on next door farm, but they put all the buildings on the other farm. So when the land agent came in to split the farm, as far as value was concerned, one brother had all the land and the other had all the buildings. It was a disaster. Now, if they'd thought in the beginning, right, okay, we may need to split this, they would have put some buildings on the other farm. So it would have been able to have had two viable units going forward. And if you think about, oh, well, I don't really want to think about this, it's difficult enough for brothers and sisters, siblings, to get into business together. But in the future, you're then expecting cousins, and that really doesn't work. You know, it's very difficult to make it work. So be realistic about it, you know, and don't force people into work together when they don't have to. Right, okay.
Rachel said, excellent presentation, Sian. How can families who could do with your services get in touch? I will send an email with your details on to everybody afterwards. I'll do that tonight, and then I'll also send a link so that anyone can rewatch the video when I've uploaded it, either towards tomorrow or next week.
Yeah, and I'm trying to cut down my traveling a bit now, but I have trained other people now to do this, and I do pass work on now. So if you're a long way from me, you will still get somebody, okay? And I'm actually doing another training course before long. So, you know, most of the country will then be covered by people who can do this. So yeah, wherever you are, you will get somebody. Right, honestly, the best push for discussing science. Yeah, I mean, you know, we talk about legal requirements and things, not, you know, I get very cross with banks sometimes because, you know, they're lending money to businesses that don't have a succession plan. And I think really banks should take some sort of responsibility for that as well. You know, I think that's important. How do you get a farmer to admit he has to step back? Oh my God, that is the hardest thing. That is the hardest thing. And so, you know, it's part of the whole family thing. That's why all the family needs to be sitting there. And I remember in one particular family, the son who was back on the farm had really bad mental health problems because dad would not give him responsibility. And there were two daughters as well. One daughter was living locally and she was trying to help. The other daughter lived quite far away, and she was the apple of dad's eye. And she didn't realize what was going on, but she came to that meeting, and all of a sudden she'd heard only what dad's side of the story, moaning about the son not being able to do this and all this. And then, but then when she heard the full story, she turned to her father and she said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" And she was the one who actually persuaded him that he should be standing back, because she then got the full story. Because often our farm children only hear one side of the story. That's why they need to be there in that meeting. And she managed to persuade dad that, you know, he was being an idiot. And so, you know, you need, it's very hard. It is very hard. And this is why people need to be planning for this themselves, because you shouldn't be having to persuade people to step back. You shouldn't be having to almost force people to step back. And let's face it, you know, folks, the facts are there. Most farm accidents happen to people over 60. You know, it's a health and safety issue as well. So be very careful about it. So it's difficult. Oh yeah, there's my website link. Yeah. By the way, if you haven't asked a question tonight and you're lying in bed 3 o'clock tomorrow morning and you think, oh, I should have asked such and such, you can actually email me a question. I'd be quite happy to answer a question, or even ring me if you want. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sian. That has been, I mean, my head's swimming, so I can't imagine how everyone else is feeling. Just absolutely brilliant, as you were previously. So much to think about. I think it's, you know, opening up that conversation and, like you say, making sure everybody's involved, and really putting that communication at the forefront of these discussions. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you everybody who's joined us this evening. Like I say, I'll send everyone an email with Sian's contact details and a link for this. Women in Dairy are organising monthly webinars at the moment, and next month will be the 24th of June at 8 o'clock with Sheena Hopper and Karen Holton. We'll be talking about social media on farm and how you can embrace that. So I'll send everyone the link for that if you would like to join. I'll also send you some details about Women in Dairy and what we do overall. But just a huge thank you to Sian for your excellent insight this evening. It was really, yeah, just brilliant. And thank you everyone for coming. And like we said, if you've got any other questions, please feel free to either drop them to myself by email or through to Sian as well.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Go and enjoy a glass of gin.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.